Also included in the injury chapters are codes for poisonings and adverse effects of drugs and chemicals. Understanding the definitions of a poisoning and adverse effect is the key to proper coding. So for a poisoning, it's considered the condition that is caused by incorrect use or not following the prescription or not following physician orders. Things such as wrong dosage, under or over amounts taken with alcohol or other drugs, including over-the-counter and some natural remedies. So basically, simply put, a poisoning is not following the doctor's orders when taking the drug. The steps to code poisoning is number 1, the poison code goes first, which we will show you an example of this later, then the manifestation, such as vomiting, rash, syncope, and then our third is that we assign our E code for the particular poison and that chemical and drug, and we consider it accidental. For an adverse effect, this is the condition caused when the drugs or other substance is taken properly, but the patient experiences some kind of side effect due to this medication. Also, you might find it's not just a drug, but for instance, if a patient has a contrast with dye in some kind of imaging, some patients are very allergic to that actual dye that goes into their system. So that would also be an adverse effect because it was administered properly, it's just the patient had some kind of complication. So our steps to coding adverse effects are number 1, we code the adverse effect first, which would be the manifestation. Second of all is our E code, or the external cause code, indicating which substance caused the problem. So remember, when we code, we're not just coding for reimbursement, but we're also tracking and for records and in contraindications of drugs are also found by these E codes. Here, let's consider this example. The patient presents with nausea and vomiting after taking the prescribed dosage of Trimeton. How do we code this encounter? Well, our first step is we have to identify whether it's a poison or an adverse effect. So the first question we're going to ask is, was the medication taken according to doctor's orders? In this example, we indicate it's a prescribed dosage, so this would be considered an adverse effect. So the first thing we do is we look up our nausea and vomiting code, and that's 787.01. Then we know we need to find our drug name in the table of drugs and chemicals so we can locate the proper E code. So we go to that table of drugs and chemicals, pause this recording if you need to so you make sure you find this same page, and then we search all the way through that table to the T's. And under Trimeton, you see the entry that's shown on this slide. So which heading do we use for the E code? Well, I'm going to show you another slide, but in general, for an adverse effect in drug, we're going to use therapeutic use. So we see it's the E933.0. So here's just to summarize, when coding for adverse effects of drugs and chemicals, we consider the drug as being used for therapeutic use unless otherwise documented. However, when coding for poisonings, we consider the poisoning an accident unless otherwise documented. So that's how we know which columns to use on our table of drugs and chemicals. For the example that we had, our correct code assignment is 787.01 for nausea and vomiting, followed by E933.0, which is therapeutic use of Trimeton. Consider this example. The patient presents with nausea and vomiting after taking double the amount of prescribed dosage of Trimeton. You try coding this scenario. Remember, the first step we're going to say, is this a poisoning or an adverse effect? In this example, it's going to be a poisoning because the patient took too much of the drug, not because it was prescribed incorrectly, but they made a mistake. So we refer to our drug and chemical table on slide 12 and also the code sequencing that we had on slide 9. So our proper codes would be 963.0. Remember that first column on the table of drugs and chemicals, I'm going to flip back to slide 12, is this poisoning column, and that's what we use for our very first code in the poisons. So we see 963.0, and now we go to accidental use, which is E858.1. So those are our proper code assignment for poisoning due to Trimeton. Remember, E codes can never be listed first and will always be a secondary code. Congratulations on coding poisoning and adverse effects with appropriate E codes.